Hey everyone. Sorry that I wasn't able to get this done earlier this week. I had a bad case of the flu, was in bed all day, and it just so happened that as soon as I got better, it just so happened that it landed on the week where I have to do an all-nighter for my high school students. So, uh, as you can probably imagine, getting this done by Wednesday was not top priority for me, but nevertheless, I'm here. So for my project, I chose to study the Pentecostals. I had the rare opportunity over the last 2 years to take my high school students. I'm a youth pastor here in Grand Rapids through a denominational study of everything that would be considered Christian. And coming from a CRC church, I think it's safe to say that the most interesting group of people to our students was the Pentecostals. And one of the reasons that I was really interested in studying them was because the variety and the diversity of the Pentecostal church is so large. I think it's something like there's 300 Pentecostal denominations, and none of them are actually. They're all independent. They don't have a formal relationship with any other congregation. And they're so opposite of what I'm used to, so opposite of the world that I live in that I just couldn't help myself. So, yeah, some of the experiences that I got to have were great and was very enlightening. So, for a couple of these questions, what are the core rituals and practices that most influence them? I would definitely say worship is key, and then also a personal relationship with Christ or a personal relationship with God, but very specifically the Holy Spirit. Um, when I went there to go worship and see their service, it was, excuse me, it was very clear that their top priority was worship. They had all the fancy lights. They had what seemed like world class musicians. They had spent most of the service was actually focused on worship, and in fact, one of the pastors that I spoke to there, he said, if we were able to just do worship the whole week and not necessarily have to do a sermon, that would be ideal. But he said, of course, we have to do a sermon. So worship is their primary practice, their primary ritual informing who they are. If an alien had came in and invaded, if we're using that analogy, they would learn how to sing and they would learn how to dance very, very quickly. Um, the pastor described their worship as upbeat, engaging, and he said extremely biblical, which I can talk about in a little bit. But yeah, so worship is a huge deal. The service was introduced by worship. It was continued by worship. The sermon came, it went, and then there was more worship. And one of the biggest reasons why they do this, one of the biggest reasons why worship is so foundational, is because they stress a high emphasis on a personal relationship with God. But again, specifically the Holy Spirit. The pastor that I got to talk to, a lot of his language and a lot of his talking was that everything that they do exists to engage with and be formed by the Holy Spirit. And they just happen to believe that worship is the best way to do that. So yeah, I would say those two, and a big reason why a relationship with the Holy Spirit is so necessary is because through the Holy Spirit they're given a baptism of the Spirit, and that's one of the really key beliefs of the Pentecostal movement, is the second blessing or the work of grace. It's also known as entire sanctification. The Holy Spirit completely cleanses the heart from sin, and it dwells within, giving power for living the Christian life effectively. And this is usually evidenced by being able to speak in tongues shortly after conversion. It's really kind of the litmus test for determining whether or not this conversion is real or not. And so for them, you need to experience the Holy Spirit. And you need to have a relationship with God and the Holy Spirit, because if you're not, then you're not going to be able to give evidence or show works that you have been interacting with the Holy Spirit. And this also goes they're very high on modern day miracles and healings. One of the things that the pastor had talked to me about was that they believe that the role of apostle still exists. And again, all of that, when you consider all of those beliefs, it's very, very important that the Holy Spirit is working intimately and regularly through what they are doing. So yeah, the biggest rituals and practices is that they want to spend a lot of time in worship, emotionally engaging worship, um, in order that they might be able to connect with and be closer to the Holy Spirit. That personal relationship is of high importance. Um, Now, how do these rituals, how do these practices, direct desires of them? I kind of already talked about it a little bit, but um, what I saw, and again, if I were an angel, or not an angel, an alien coming down and hanging out with these people for the first time, when you talk to the people around there, when you hear what they have to say in worship, there's a huge emphasis on power and personal power, or maybe authority is the better word. Um, a lot of the stuff that they do and a lot of rituals and practices that they engage in almost seem to exist for the sole purpose of so that God can work through me. I can be a source of authority. I can be a source of power. And a lot of it too is self betterment or self improvement. What I found to be really, really interesting was that the sermon, or the service that I went to, it was a 45-minute sermon. It was about like a 2.5 hour service. 45-minute sermon, and they did not reference the Bible once until minute 43 out of 45. And I think this goes, the most of the sermon was centered around how they can access the power of the Holy Spirit to better their lives, to make an impact in their communities, to make an impact in their families, to make an impact in their friendships and in their relationships. It was not very Bible focused. They didn't really, I shouldn't say they didn't care, but if you were an alien coming down, you would not get at first glance that they were all too interested in what the Bible has to say. They'd realize that these people were much more interested in how the Holy Spirit can affect what they're doing right here, right now, how their whole person, their emotional, their mental, every part of their being can be engaged with and in conjunction with the work of the Spirit. Now, I think it'd be really easy to perhaps pick on the fact that they didn't use the Bible very much in their sermon or in their practices. And in fact, I actually asked the pastor about this when I met with him. I said, I'm not trying to be offensive, but I recognize that the Bible really didn't get used in the 45-minute sermon. And his response to that was, well, we don't want to be overwhelmingly churchy. And so while some might pick on that, and while some might find criticism in that, and I find some faults in that. However, I don't think what can't be missed is that their rituals and their practices, their overwhelming desire for emotional and engaging worship, mixed with a personal relationship with Christ, their rituals and their practices definitely direct their desires to be evangelical. They want to have very engaging and very attractive worship so that people who have never stepped inside of a church, people that may have been burnt by church, can feel something again. They don't want to beat you over the head with the Bible because they want people who might have been beaten over the head with the Bible to get a break. And not only that, this personal relationship with Christ, they want to invite people to experience that same personal relationship. And so it was the pastor, what he had said is it's not uncommon for people to invite their friends to church who have never been, and they feel comfortable doing so because they know that they're not going to be overwhelmed by what their definition of church might be. And because they're evangelical in that sense, they're very evangelical and very missional in all that they do. Just to list off some things that the pastor said, they have a neighborhood VBS, they've got a food pantry, they have a prison ministry, they've sent $38 million to missions around the world. He says they're all about being illustration of God's love to people. I thought there was a very interesting comment that he made. He said the church is here to serve the kingdom, not the other way around. He does not believe that the kingdom, with the community around him, is there to serve the church. We're here to go out, and we're here to win souls. And so even the somewhat non-liturgical and the very free-flowing idea of their rituals and practices, again, while some may criticize it, I think that there's something very respectful in it, in that they do have a high emphasis on winning their neighbors over. So, and then the last question: what practices could strengthen my own church? I am in a classic West Michigan, overwhelmingly Dutch CRC church, and I don't know if many people know who the Holy Spirit is, if they've ever had a genuine interaction with the Holy Spirit. I'll never forget, I had spoken about spiritual warfare one night at one of our youth groups, and a young girl came up to me and talked to me about it. She said, I think I might be experiencing some of that spiritual warfare. And I kind of explained to her what it might look like, and I got a very unhappy call from the mother the next day about how we don't really believe in all of that. Faithful member of our church, we don't really believe in all the supernatural spirit stuff. So I really do think that what the Pentecostal church can teach us, my church specifically, is that the Holy Spirit is alive, and the Holy Spirit is powerful today. The Holy Spirit did not just exist when he brought his church into Pentecost. The Holy Spirit is active, alive, and is a powerful force who can be actually engaged on a daily basis. I think that that's a great gift that the Pentecostal church has to offer us. And also their love for neighbor. I think that in the church I'm in, we like to show our love by showing how much money we can give to the church, but that doesn't necessarily show love to everyone in the same way. And so I think what I saw in the Pentecostal church, I visited, was they put their money where their mouth stood, and they really did go out. They walked the walk. They didn't just talk the talk. They are serving, and they're doing a lot, and they're doing it so that they can win people to Jesus. And so just that passion, that raw passion to follow Jesus, is admirable, and it's envious. So yeah, this is a fantastic experience. Absolutely loved it, and looking forward to your questions.